and gentlemen.
Hiya, coward.
You are now listening to Retro Radio.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of Retro Radio, your weekly online real player show featuring classic arcade and computer gaming, emulation, news, and information. I'm Shane R. Monroe, your host. We're glad to have you with us. Well, we did skip a week of the show, trying to secure you the best and most entertaining news and interviews for Retro Radio, and I think this is one of the best shows yet. Along with our regular features, which includes the arcade emulation update segment and the growing popular computer gaming emulation segment, we will be featuring an interview with one of the old school EMU authors, JROK, aka James Rowan, creator of the first arcade quality translations of Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man, as well as the JAS emulator that features emulation of Mappy, Sky Kid, Galpus, and others. First, let's update with the major emulators and see what's happening. MAME is holding strong at version 0.34 Beta 6, although Beta 7 should be out any time now from what I understand, maybe even as you're listening to this. Many Neo Geo games now have sounds, he says as he bites his lip, and those that do not seem to be bad ROM dump problems, not emulation-related problems. The long-awaited Williams Midway games like Mortal Kombat, NARC, Smash TV, and Impact Football have not yet been added, although the main dev team has received the drivers and now is granted a peek at a couple of these games in operation. Although they are continually optimizing and hence increasing the speed, these games are flat unplayable at this point on my P200 MMX. Without sound and frame skip 2, I can sort of play them. I gotta admit though, Alex and the others working on this drivers ought to get some sort of friggin' award. I would have never thought to see these games emulated even this fast, given the intricate custom hardware. Even the damn speech works. You guys kick ass. Hopefully I can play NARC on my crap hole PC someday. Oh, and for those of you that missed it, the Win32 version of MAME, MAME 32, is now up to speed with the DOS release, although Zookeeper sure seemed a hell of a lot more choppy on MAME 32 than on MAME for DOS. And this is a first for me, because usually the Win32 version runs better for me. The arcade, the RetroCade mailing list is like a ghost town. It's been so quiet since the last fight over what keys were disabled in the last private beta's glitchy number lock bug. For those of you who might have missed that, in version 1.1 beta 2, if you had the number lock active, most of the system key failed. You know, the important ones like escape and print screen and F8. Since the devs didn't ever have theirs on and obviously couldn't duplicate the problem we were all facing, they got a little upset. It was good for a laugh. Other than that, there isn't much new to report on these lines. The GUI improvements are fruitful so far. Many in-GUI controls that were previously not available are now available in this release. I'm hoping for game recording and playback from the GUI soon. Now an update with our brothers at Digital Leisure. You know, the kind folks that gave me permission to offer you all the entire track mode videos for Dragon's Lair, Dragon's Lair 2, and Space Ace, which are all available at Insert Coin's parent page, MonroeWorld.com, in the Gotta Have It multimedia area. And these are all available in Real Player G2 format. So most of you know Digital Leisure has acquired the rights to many Laserdisc games for the 80s, including the aforementioned games, Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, etc. What you might not have known that is in addition to offering these games in a new Windows 95 format, these games are also available for those of you with DVD-ROM drives. Full screen, better than Laserdisc quality video and sound games. These have been available for some time now. What I would like to bring to your attention, however, is the Digital Leisure's newest masterpiece, Dragon's Lair, for your set-top DVD. That's right, now you can play Dragon's Lair in full DVD quality without a computer. Simply drop the DVD into your standard DVD player, set-top box sitting on top of your TV, grab the remote, sit back, and guide Dirk the Daring through his adventures. As with all DVD titles, you get a buttload of extras, including interviews with the god himself, Don Bluth, taken from his personal archives. And this game player almost has to buy a DVD just for the Don Bluth goodies alone. There's also a special watch mode to simply sit back and watch the game play itself all the way through. Digital Leisure would like to note that both the quality of the sound and video on this DVD version is much better than the DVD-ROM version for your computer, and it will not work on the Toshiba 2107 and 3107 models. but it does work fine on every other DVD set-top box they've tested. They've shipped the product already to many retailers, probably places like Suncoast and Blockbuster will be carrying it first. And there's already more lined up to carry it later on. You can, of course, order directly from Digital Leisure at their webpage, www.digitalleisure.com. And thanks again for the kindness of the folks over there for letting me use the clips of their games in my show, which we do every week. The interview with Digital Leisure, I know everyone's still waiting for that. It is a go. We just don't know when yet. As you can tell, they're a pretty busy group over there. And now, folks, it's time to flashback. Flashback to a day when games were great and the number of bits was 8. This is the classic computer emulation portion of the show. Name this game. Soothing sounds of Paul Norman, the one-man band at this small company. This was the first of his public products for the Commodore 64. Do you know the name of the game? If you guessed Forbidden Forest, then you guessed right this week. Forbidden Forest was the first of Cosme's Games, a small independent company mainly populated by the master himself, Paul Norman. The company did go on to make some other games, such as Forbidden Forest 2, Aztec Challenge, Caverns of Kafka, and, of course, the infamous and maybe one of the very first realistic helicopter simulators, for the C64, called Super Huey. There was also another couple in there. Slinky was one of my favorites. It was a blatant Q*bert ripoff, of course, but it had some incredible elements of gameplay. Forbidden Forest was what I would call one of the first third-person shooters, involving you as a lone archer in the middle of the woods shooting down some of the nastiest, scariest creatures ever seen in a video game for the C64. That is, of course, until the games like Monty on the Run and Jet Set Willy. These games, of course, featured flying knives and boots and other ghostly apparitions. I had to mention that. I promised one of the folks on IRC I would mention Monty on the Run, and I just neatly slipped that in there. Anyway, Forbidden Forest was sort of stage-based. The first stage had you fighting giant spiders. The second ones had skeletons that would come spearing at you. It also had this weird phantom ghost of Christmas future thing, some flying around bees, giant bees, of course, and these weird, freaky jumping frogs that would come out of the background. And, of course, the Demogorgon at the end was probably one of the scariest things in video games. It was almost as bad as that type-in game Goodbye Charlie that it featured in Compute Magazine, where you were almost afraid to push the movement keys, fearing that the lightning would strike and scare the pee out of you. Forbidden Forest's final sequence is much like that. The Demogorgon is hiding somewhere in the backdrop of the sky. Of course, the lightning flashes are the only way to tell really where he is. And he does get closer, and as time runs out, if he gets to the end, he gets you, and he gets you well. In fact, I think the proper phrase would be he owned you. Now, so what made Forbidden Forest unlike all the other freaky, weird shooters that came out for the C64? Well, first of all, because it was so early in the C64's career, it was amazingly graphics. I mean, you expected to look for a place to put a quarter in. It was so good. You heard some of the intro music at the beginning. This was one of the very first what I call context-sensitive musical games, whereas as the scene changed, so did the music. This has been featured in like Jedi Knights and a lot of other games like Wing Commander, where as different battles would come on, the music would change to give you a burst of energy. This really added to the excitement of the game. The music would change, and you would have to every so often reload your arrows, which would leave you vulnerable. It was really great, and it did have a third-party, first-person perspective, for lack of a better term. It's one of those games you really can't really understand until you play it. What other things that made Forbidden Forest such a wicked, gnarly game was the fact that time actually happened while you were there. As you played, the sun would set and the moon would rise. It would become dark, there'd be crickets, there'd be glittering stars, you'd see the man in the moon, the whole ball of wax, and it was very atmospheric. And for an 8-bit game to capture that sort of air that even now is difficult to capture, even in the best of the 3D shooters, is to me a landmark in video gaming history, certainly in 8-bit gaming history. And the C64, with its incredible video and audio technology, really made it a great platform for these sort of landmark, history-changing sort of games to happen. Forbidden Forest was very popular at its time. It did very well, spawning, again, as I mentioned, Forbidden Forest 2, which was the first 4D game where you could actually run into the screen. Unfortunately, it wasn't nearly as much fun as the original game was. It didn't quite have the air and the essence that the first one did, or the originality, I guess, at this point in time. But some of his other games from Cosme, including Caverns of Kafka, Forbidden Forest 2, Super Huey Slinky, Paul Norman was a very multi-talented individual. And in fact, Paul, if you happen to hear this, or you know Mr. Norman personally, I'd love to have you for an interview on Retro Radio, because that would be the bomb. Because I've always loved Paul Norman's stuff. It's been very cutting edge, and as music goes, I think he's right up there with Hubbard. And in today's world where graphic artists and musicians and everybody's in their own department and they merge together to bring up a game, and here's Paul. I mean, I could just see the guy sitting at home in front of the tube, you know, pounding out on the keyboard, cranking out Forbidden Forest all on his own. I mean, the graphics, the music, the storyline, the animation, and everything. It's real impressive to me that one man could pump that out. And Caverns of Kafka was just some of the best freaky, mind-tingling music that I'd ever heard on the C64. And we'll probably feature Caverns of Kafka another day. As most of my listeners seem to like to hear the old stories, the old arcade stories, and things that pertain to my real life. Forbidden Forest, of course, has a key element in the past. My friend Troy, I'm wondering if he's listening or not. He and I grew up together, and in junior high school was about the time that the C64 was popular. And I remember neither of us could afford 1541 disk drives. That was just, you know, it's $200-300 back then, and, you know, we're just kids. How can you afford stuff like that? We were lucky to have C64s at all. Of course, we both did have tape drives, and so finding software on tape was, you know, kind of a drag. Well, we took a trip to his grandmother's house in Spokane. Now, Spokane's about 150 miles, and when you're a little kid, 150 miles is like the other side of the country. We ended up going over to Spokane, and of course, where we're at, there's no shopping centers. Everything is kind of ho-dunk over here. But Spokane, now there's a city. So it was exciting that he invited me to come over with he and his brothers to his grandmother's house. And as soon as we got there, we decided to check out one of the malls. Actually, his mom wanted to go shopping, so we really didn't have any choice. But we went to Sears, and of course, Sears back then was like the C64 haven. And we got up there, and there was Forbidden Forest on tape, sitting behind the display panel. It was $15. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen software that was worth a rat's butt cost $15. Anyway, so of course, you know, we pulled our money together, and his brothers put in, and I put in some money, and he put in some money, and we scraped together $15 to take Forbidden Forest back to his grandma's. We ported the C64 with us, of course. You know, as computer geeks, we can't live long without it. And he went ahead and we got the tape. We brought it home. We inserted the tape, and anyone who has any history of the C64 knows that a tape-loading game was definitely an effort and patience and futility in some cases if your heads were misaligned a little bit. Anyway, so we loaded this game, and I swear it must have been 11 or 12 minutes of load time. So you PlayStation owners take heart. Even in the old days, it took a long time to load games. So as soon as Forbidden Forest popped on, and we pressed that function key to select what level, and the game pounded on, and there's the music you heard at the beginning of the episode here, and we were just totally dumbfounded. I mean, our jaws dropped, and we were mesmerized as the dragon came flying onto the screen. And I don't know how many spiritual old video gaming experiences you had, but this was definitely one of the top 5 anyway. You know, the dragon flew on, and in fact, the guy died before any of us had a chance to pick up the joystick because we were so in awe of the graphics and the music and the ambience, and we were taken in. Well, needless to say, that weekend, we slept in shifts. I'd go to sleep while Troy and his brothers would play. and we just kind of rotate turns. Now, you know, that's the sort of the difference. People don't understand. Computers have become so commonplace. It's like, yeah, you know, I got on the internet last night. It's like, you know, I cut my toenails or I changed my socks. There's no magic in computers anymore because everybody's got one. Everyone thinks they know something, which most of them don't. And there's no magic. It's not like, you know, say, man, you know, last weekend we stayed up 48 hours straight playing Forbidden Forest. You don't have that kind of magic anymore. And it's not just because we were kids or that sort of thing. It was because there was magic involved. And that's one of the reasons why I bring up this particular part of my show, is to share the magic that these old 8-bit classics actually brought to me and my family and my friends and the scene in general. But anyway, I think that'll about wrap it up for this segment of the show. As much as I'd like to stay in C64 land, there's other things to cover, including our special interview. I know you've been waiting. Our special interview this week is going to be with JROK of the JAS emulator. Very exciting. He agreed to be on the show. James, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks a lot for giving us your time in this interview. Let's get on with the first question. You're most notably famous for one of the first multi-game emulators, JAS, or JROK's arcade emulator, which originally brought Mappy to the emulation scene. Tell us what made you choose that particular game to emulate over, say, a different 6809 CPU game.
Well, thanks for inviting me on the show, Shane. It's great to be here in the virtual studio. Well, why did I choose Mappy? I would say probably because it's one of my all-time favorite games. I rediscovered Mappy by accident when I first started collecting. I bought a board set, plugged it in, and suddenly it was like a revelation. It was like, I remember this game. It's cool. I just got to have another go. My girlfriend's also a big Mappy fan, and she really kicks my butt at the game we know in-house as Mousy Bouncy, but I won't dwell on that. The other thing is, it's a great fun game. It's simple, it's got cute graphics, you can play it for up to about level 15 or 16, and when it starts getting insanely hard. I like it. I mean, it's a classic in the truest form. It's original and very quirky. At that time, nobody had released a good emulator for it. There was the Namco emulator, which I thought was pretty appalling, really. I mean, it was slow. I had a Pentium Pro 200, and it only ran about 97% speed. And if you maximized the screen, it dropped to about 33%, which was kind of sad, really. It seemed very dependent on how fast your video card was. I'd be pretty embarrassed to release something that crap as a commercial product. But it was also available only in Japan, and the actual play area, the size of the screen, was tiny. There was no sign of an emulator on the horizon, so I thought it was time that somebody did one. I already knew 6809 fairly well because of other projects that I'd worked on, and the Mappy hardware itself lent very easily to emulation. There was nothing terribly complex on there. It was easy to figure out the memory map. I basically disassembled the game and worked out where all the hardware was and how it all worked. It was a good project to start on, and it was good to learn emulation through. It was also basically a very popular game that I really liked. I figured if you needed the job done, you had to do it yourself. I should also say Dave Spicer gave great consulting support on the whole project. After all, he is one of the gurus of optimization and how to write emulators that run really well on the most basic of machines. And he was a big support through the whole thing.
Do you have any other particular passions to the other games emulated in JAS, or just simply because they run on the same hardware?
Any passion for the other games in JAS? Well, I'd have to give the honest answer and say, yes, every single game in JAS is one I really like. I don't think there's anything in JAS I'm not terribly keen on. Perhaps the exception to that is Pac-Land. Initially, I wasn't terribly keen on it, but just wanted to add it for completeness. As I coded the driver, I played more and more of the game and ended up getting into it. And now I actually really like Pac-Land. I do actually enjoy playing it. Sky Kid has to be my favorite game on JAS. To me, that is one of the absolute classics of the late 80s. It has so many elements I really liked. It was cute, it was quirky, it was original. I love the fact you were flying this plane, you could shoot down the enemy planes, you could shoot the stuff on the ground, you could bomb the targets. It was absolute mayhem. I don't know what that says about me, but I just really liked the game. It's also really good in the two-player cooperative mode. If you get a chance, play it like that. Dig Dug 2 was added partly because it was a real rarity. There's only 2 board sets known of in the collecting community. It was released in 1985, which was the time of the great video game crash, and I don't think it had a very wide distribution or did very well. As a result, it's extremely rare. It's a great game as well. It gets insanely hard after about level 22, although a few people have sent me emails saying things like, I didn't find it got that hard after 22. Yeah, right. It's a very likable game, and it's got such a catchy tune. It'll drive you mad in the end, though. I'm going to stick my neck out now and say that Gaplus was not one of my favorites. Gaplus, I thought, never quite had that edge that Galaga did. Galaga was a real adrenaline-pumping, screaming game, but Gaplus never quite had it for me. Galaga 88 had more of the appeal of Galaga, but Gaplus, no. Super Pac-Man was also being criticized for being too easy. I liked it. I mean, it was easy. You could get extremely far on one credit. It was okay. It wasn't as good as, say, Junior Pac-Man, but it wasn't a bad game at all. But if you wanted an ordered list, I'd have to say Sky Kid, Matty, Dig Dug 2, Gaplus, then Super Pac-Man.
Tell us what other projects you're currently involved in with regards to classic arcade game emulation.
Other emulation projects, well, I think in the short term I'd like to add Barajuke and Metrocross to Jazz. There again, 6809-based hardware. Sort of an odd cross between Pac-Land and Sky Kid. They're both pretty playable games. I like Metrocross. Barajuke features some really big sprites and had 4-bit sampled voice effects. I think they're in Japanese because I can't make out what they say. The ultimate goal with Jazz, and this has been true from its earliest days, has been to support the Namco System 1 hardware. This was the base for a number of great Namco games, such as Pac-Mania, Galaga 88, Splatterhouse, Dragon Spirit. There was also a few Japanese releases, such as Tank Force, World Stadium. They might have been released in the US, but I think they were very small distribution runs. Ordine, I think, is another one as well. The hardware itself is fantastic. I'd say it's the pinnacle of 8-bit engineering. It featured 24-bit color, stereo sound. It ran on 4 CPUs. It was very, very good hardware. All those games I pretty much love, especially Pac-Mania, which is the ultimate Pac-Man game. I think that's fair to say. Dragon Spirit's a bit cheesy. Splatterhouse is very good, very bloody, very gory, pretty gross too. And Galaga 88 is a really good follow-up to Galaga. In some ways, it has the same appeal as the original Galaga. I prefer it over Gaplus myself, but that's the ultimate aim in Jazz. Don't expect any of that soon, though. Unfortunately, I've got a lot of other stuff going on right now, which saps my time from emulation projects. I know there's a number of other people working on System 1 support, and good luck to them. Don't know who's going to be first, but as long as somebody does it, that's the important thing.
James, how do you feel about the huge explosion in arcade game emulation popularity? Do you still get flooded with lots of mails from new users of Jazz, or have things pretty much calmed down?
I don't actually get that much email these days about Jazz. I probably get about the same as I do for PAC-PC and PC Bird. I think most people have at least read a FAQ and can figure out how to use it, which does help. I still get the occasional email asking, how do I run a zip file? Those kind of emails tend not to get a reply. Okay, on to the second question. I suppose the explosion in popularity of emulation and the classic gaming scene shouldn't be that surprising considering how big arcades were in the early 80s. I mean, a lot of us when we were growing up spent time in arcades, loved playing the games, spent a lot of money playing the games. I mean, in the early 80s, the market was huge. The industry made millions. I remember an operator saying to me just recently that in the early 80s, you could get a cardboard box, stick a coin slot in it, and there was a good chance it would make money. So that has to equate to a lot of kids playing a lot of arcade machines for a lot of time. I guess those people grew up, they're now approaching their 30s or they're in their 30s, and it's a great way of reliving classic gaming. I mean, a lot of us really enjoyed those games and spent a lot of time learning how to play them, and they were just really addictive. I mean, I remember just having the itch to play Galaxian. It was, I just got to have another go. I mean, there's a lot of games like that, and a lot of people on the collecting scene talk about the same sort of experiences where they were kids in the arcades and now they're owning a piece of their childhood. And emulation, I think, is similar. People loved playing those games. The concepts behind them were often simple or quirky or fun. It's a time that will never be repeated. And it's a tribute to the designers that 20 years later, the games are still really popular.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Save Our High Scores project? How do people get involved with this, and how did you get started with it?
Well, Save Our High Scores, the project started off as a discussion on the Usenet group of could you get Gallagher to save its high scores. By default, the Gallagher arcade game during power-up actually clears all its memory and resets the high scores. So I decided to hook up some small battery-backed RAM that would allow Gallagher to retain its high scores even with the power off. This required a few modifications to the original game ROMs so that it wouldn't reset the high score table when you powered the machine on. Currently, I think we've had one running for about 3 months now or thereabouts, and the memory devices I've used have a lifespan of about 10 years. So we figured that should probably be enough to keep the high scores for more than anybody would care to be interested in them. We had some ideas about using another memory device, which would give us about 100 years lifespan, but that's probably approaching overkill there. The other games came about mostly as just suggestions. Do you think we could add Game X? Bombjack was a definite, because Bombjack's a very addictive game, and that too lost its high scores. Another couple of games I'm going to add it to are Sky Kid and Super Pac-Man. I'm always open to suggestions for games that we could add to save our high scores to. It's fairly straightforward to do. It depends on the hardware involved, whether you need like small adapter boards or whether you could do a straight chip replace. It's an ongoing project, and as I come across games that I think could really benefit from it, I'll certainly add them.
You know, so many users have said to me that JROK's Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man game conversions were the first taste of classic gaming on their PC they had. Myself, I only played them for the first time while writing this interview, and damn, I've been in this classic MU bit for over a year now, and I would have believed these were full emulations, not even remakes. Why don't you tell us your story behind writing these creations, as well as the PC BERT conversion? What was the most difficult part of making these recreations so damn good?
The idea with the PAC-PC games was to write a conversion that was as close to the original games as possible. The original PAC-PC version 1 looks really cheesy these days, and I encourage anybody with it to delete it for the sake of all humanity. The later games, Miss PAC-PC, which was the follow-on, I tried much harder to get it to the original, and there was some awesome help from Dave Halleck, who's involved with Videotopia, the traveling game exhibit, who did an amazing job of beta testing that and giving me feedback on ghost timings, movement, how the game actually felt to play. I never came across a home system that had a really good conversion of Pac-Man. That was part of my motivation in writing it. I wanted to do a conversion that was as close to the real thing as you could get. I actually bought an arcade machine around the same time. All in all, I was quite pleased with the way it came out. PC BERT followed on, but that got mired down by basically being pushed to the bottom of my priorities pile. And I didn't get that completed for about 2 years after I started it. When it came to the hardest thing, I think it was really a case of getting the feel of the original game, having the ghosts move realistically, having their behavior following the original game. I think I managed to get that fairly well sorted out after a lot of experimentation. The overall result was quite close to the original. The other thing there was timings, making sure that things occurred at the right times and that it followed the original. The same was true of PC BERT. That also had a lot of experimentation with getting the characters in the game to appear and move as they did in the original. Overall, I was quite happy with the way it came out.
Everyone in the scene seems to hail from some classic gaming system or computer like the C64 or Apple II or other 8 or 16-bit platforms. Do you fall into this category? Tell us a little bit about the JROK history of computing.
The JROK history of computing. Right. Where can I start? No, I never had an Apple II. I did have a ZX81. It was a wonderful black and white computer by Sinclair in the UK, and I think it was the computing equivalent of a Stone Axe. It was pretty basic. And from there, I graduated to a Sinclair Spectrum. I had a Commodore 64. Chief in Space is still the greatest Commodore 64 game of all time. All hail Jeff Minter. There was also a VIC-20 in there somewhere. And around 1987, I bought my first PC. That was a classic Amstrad XT. It was a 8 megahertz 8086-based machine, real leading-edge computer technology for the time, with a CGA card. And it was black and white. That was pretty basic. And a year later, that would have been 1988, I got my Amiga. I loved that machine. That was great. I mean, it had great graphics and sound. It was awesome for its time. I mean, it really was quite an amazing machine. And I did a lot on the Amiga. I coded some demos for groups like Share and Enjoy in the UK. And I just had a blast. I had that machine for like 4 years, right up until like 1992, when it died for the last time and I gave it up. At that time, I was moving much more into the PCs and spent about 2 years, about 2 years completely out of computers. I didn't really do anything with them. I think it was because I was working with them so much. I just got sick of them for a while. I really started getting back into it about 94. That was when I coded PAC-PC and began moving towards emulation, although actually writing games is probably more fun overall. I think I'll probably get back to writing some games when I find time and the motivation to do it.
With all the chaos and mayhem being worked on over copyrights on classic arcade games, and some groups like the ISDA and Nintendo becoming active in pursuing the protection of their intellectual property, what do you feel will happen to the emulation scene, if anything, as a result? Do you personally feel sympathetic to these companies who didn't seem to care about these forgotten games until folks like yourself breathed new life back into them?
Well, it is understandable that these companies would wish to protect their intellectual property. After all, they do actually own the games and is their material. They invested in them originally. It does seem very odd that they're not offering any kind of emulator so you can play the original game. There does seem to be a market and a great deal of interest in emulation. So when you're going through all the effort of protecting your intellectual rights against a lot of people obviously want to download and distribute these ROMs, it would make sense to be marketing a product that tapped into this market, but then again, mega corporates and making intelligent business decisions often don't run hand in hand. But if tomorrow we saw a major clampdown on the emulation scene, archive sites being hounded off the internet through threats of legal action, ISPs being harassed and forced to shut down servers that support emulation sites, I think what you would see then is the sites moving to countries like Argentina or Brazil or Honduras, Grand Cayman, the former Soviet Union, Bosnia, Yugoslavia, countries where the U.S. trade organizations have very little say, and it would be pretty difficult to drive those sites off the internet. You might see as well the emulation scene becoming much more like the pirate software scene. Already now, there's a big wares underground where the latest games are available via FTP or on somebody's web page, and that doesn't seem to be abating. And that's extremely illegal and leaves you very open for prosecution, but it still carries on. You might see it disappear from the mainstream and it become more of an underground kind of culture, but it's going to be difficult to stop it, especially with the internationalization of the computer scene thanks to the internet. Ultimately, it's down to the copyright holders, whether they choose to prosecute people for distributing their ROMs or having them on archive sites. It's their material, they can choose to defend it or not. In an ideal world, it would be nice to say that they don't care about this material, it's free to distribute.
Do you do any modern gaming, like real-time strategy or 3D shooters? What about other emus, like console or computer emulation?
Modern gaming. Oh, well, what can I say about modern gaming? The modern arcade can be summed up in the phrase, it's crap. There isn't very many original or exciting new games coming out. I quite like NFL Blitz, and I like the shooters these days. In fact, I actually prefer pinball over modern arcade games. Seeing loads and loads of different beat-em-ups just being churned out by the manufacturers just leaves me cold. Then again, I don't know if they're aiming at me or whether I'm getting too old for the arcades or what. Well, when it comes to modern games on the PC, I don't really like a great deal of them. Anything that's a Doom clone or Tomb Raider, forget it. I did Doom to death years ago. I'm just not interested in playing any more clones of Doom. They're almost as bad as arcade beat-em-ups. Other games I've liked recently on the PC have been things like Swift 3D, which is a great blast. Mass Destruction, Ignition, Shadows of the Empire. They all had high appeal for me. I like playing those. Oh, and Magic Carpet. That's getting a bit long in the tooth now. Time for a Magic Carpet 2000, I think. When it comes to emulation, I really like X128, the Sinclair Spectrum emulator, because it will play Chucky Egg perfectly. It's also fun to play things like Jetpack, Cookie. Some of the old Spectrum classics were great fun. I also use MAME as well. I play some games in MAME. I love the iRobot emulator. Hooking up our iRobot to play in a cabinet is such a pain. I'd rather play it on the emulator. It's much easier to do. And of course, there's the ultimate Commodore 64 game of all time, Sheep in Space. I actually still play that every now and then. It still retains its addictive appeal. I get a calling for it, and it's like, I've just got to play a couple of games. It's one of Jeff Minter's greatest. It's Defender-esque. It's got a lot of appeal, like Defender. There's a hint of scramble in there. Hours of entertainment. Have a look at it if you haven't seen it. That really does it for classic and PC gaming. Modern arcades aren't that much fun, but the PC certainly has a lot of good stuff on it.
James, last question. Is there anything in emulation that you personally are waiting for? Some sort of technology or game that has yet to been unlocked or emulated?
I don't think there's anything I'm really waiting for urgently. Most of the games I like are already emulated and well catered for. There's a few titles like the more modern games, like Namco's Museum, which had alternative versions of Pac-Man and Big Doug and Gallagher on it. I'd like to see those done at some point. Although I understand the biggest problem with those is reading the graphics ROMs off them. They're actually surface-mounted and soldered onto the board, so somebody would need to give up a board to pull the ROMs off and read them. Yeah, that's definitely a game I'd like to see emulated. Good luck to whoever gets that one done.
James, once again, thank you so much for appearing on Retro Radio this week. It's been a pleasure to have you. I'm sure lots of folks out there are real excited to have you as part of the show, and maybe we can do this again some other time. Well, folks, it's been a long show, and I don't think I'll prattle on this week, unlike other weeks. Next show, I plan to offer another interview with another great in the field of classic gaming, as well as another glance back into the 8-bit world. Heck, maybe even another funny story from Shane's classic arcade gaming past. Who knows? As always, I'm thrilled to have all of you listening to the show. The audience base has grown nearly exponentially since Dave's Classics has started advertising the show. Thanks a bunch, Dave. And with my limited licensed Real Player G2 server, I'm afraid it's been kind of standing room only at Retro Radio lately. I plan to remedy that soon. But until then, I want to thank all of you folks for taking the time to actually download the show and listen, vice listening to it streaming. You guys are the greatest, and please keep those letters coming. I love them. Every day I get great news from you folks, great letters, encouragements, and that makes it all worth it. Anyway, folks, this is Shane R. Monroe from MonroeWorld.com saying until next week,